I am here to give you a quick overview of Mr. Dale Versagen. Dale is a senior research associate and is assigned to a range of research, training, and technical assistance projects in various parts of the country. Dale has over 30 years of experience providing training, consultation, and project management for state vocational rehabilitation agencies throughout the country. He provides consultation and training in the areas of program development, performance management, marketing, job development, supported and customized employment, and case management, and has developed curriculums and provided trainings on supported and customized employment for a wide range of state agencies and organizations. Describing himself as someone who can't sit still, Dale loves to travel for work and for pleasure, listening to live music, riding his motorcycle, sailing and boating, and watching sports. He grew up in Wisconsin and still lives there today and would be happy to live there forever. Can you imagine that? In Madison, specifically, as long as he can leave frequently in the winter. Here is, without further ado, my esteemed colleague, Dale Versagen.
Thank you, Daryl. That's quite a energetic introduction. Appreciate it. So welcome, everybody. This is the third webinar in the series of 3 titled Assessing Economic Impact and the Benefit of Employment Programs. Next slide, please. And just for some folks, I'm told that there are some of you that have been participating in all 3 of these webinars, but that there is also a number of you that have not. So I don't want to spend obviously too much time on the other webinars, but I just want to kind of give a context for this one. So all of the information in this whole series is based on an employer economic impact study that myself and Chip Kenny worked on for the Office on Disability Employment Policy at the Department of Labor. And the results of that study is the basis of these webinars. The white paper associated with that study is not out, but it will be, I believe, any minute. We've just been waiting for it to be released by the Department of Labor. You can access that the report through us, and so I think probably the best way would be just to email us, let us know that you're interested, and then we can send that to you when it's released. The first session was how employment programs do have an economic benefit on specific employers. The second one was how to approach and partner with employers, and this was all based on recommendations and input that was provided by the employers that we interviewed for the study. And then that brings us to today's, which is on how to really kind of take this whole process that we use to gather this information around how our programs benefit employers, and really try to make it applicable to you and what you're doing and with the employers that you're working with. So today we're going to just have a brief review of the study and its findings. And again, that's mostly for the folks that weren't able to attend the other webinars. We'll talk about designing an employer survey process. We'll review an employer economic impact study. That impact study is in a Word document, so you should be able to access that and use that Word document as you see fit. It will be posted with this webinar, so you can access it that way. And I believe that when Maynard sends out the archive email with the archive of the webinar, you should be able to access the study that way as well. And then lastly, we will talk about the benefits of conducting such an economic impact. Okay, slide 10, please. So this was the study. I won't obviously read it to you, but it was funded by the Office on Disability Employment Policy. And as it says there, is to gain the perspective of employers related to employing folks with disabilities, and just how have our programs, particularly the service of customizing jobs, how has that been received, perceived, and beneficial to the employer community? Slide 11. So the economic impact is defined by an event, and that's really the use of your services on working with a specific employer. So in other words, the employer has gone along delivering products or services, and then we came into the picture. We placed folks with disabilities into their workplace. That's the economic event. We then want to measure that impact, and we use this impact analysis to do so. Slide 12. So the selection criteria that we used was we needed an employer that had operational and economic benefits and acknowledged some sort of benefit of working with us, our employment programs, and the hiring of a person with a disability. Work directly with one or more provider organizations such as yourselves in their community, and that the person that we're interviewing or participating in the focus groups that we conducted also played a major role in the hiring, approval, and the customizing of one or more jobs. And then we had an optional one in that customized job for a person with a disability specifically met the definition that ODEP has for what constitutes a customized job. Because we do hear, a lot of different folks say, yeah, we've customized the job, but it doesn't always meet that definition. Slide 13. And so think about that selection criteria, because in just a couple minutes, we're going to ask you, and as a matter of fact, if you don't mind, Maynard, maybe go back to slide 12 for just a second. Look over this criteria, and because we're going to ask you the question, do you have an employer that kind of meets this selection criteria? And if the answer is yes, we kind of want an interest to know how many employers might you feel would meet that selection criteria, specifically having benefited and would acknowledge that they had benefited from the services that you've provided. Okay, slide 13. This were the types of employers that we used for the study. And as you can see, it's a mix of people that were in operational roles, but also folks representing human resource departments, recruiting, so forth. Slide 14. And the findings, and this was presented with some specificity during the first webinar. And again, if you didn't hear that, I would encourage you to see if you can access that webinar and go through it. But this is what we found, is that they did acknowledge benefits to the services we've provided. And it was in reduced costs, both of hiring, recruiting, and training folks. They saw that there was reduced turnover and absenteeism, particularly amongst the folks that we placed. They recognized that there was an improved workplace culture, particularly through the customized employment jobs. What they found is that the other co-workers, the other people in the workplace, found the hiring of these folks who were also taking over some of the tasks that they may have otherwise had to do as a way to support them in their job. And what they reported was that there was reduced turnover and absenteeism amongst even the rest of the workforce, not only the people that we placed, but they tended to stay longer. They tended to not miss as much work. based on they felt the workplace was flexible, and they were being better supported through the use of our services. Employers reported expanded placements once they kind of got used to the notion of hiring the folks with disabilities, and particularly customizing jobs. They were interested in more in different types of placements. And that they also advanced a number of those folks that originally came in doing a specific set of tasks. They then added to those tasks and added their hours, increased their pay, and in a couple instances actually promoted them to higher levels of responsibility and higher pay. And then, of course, through the customized employment process, they reported increases in productivity and had real specific estimates of both of financial and economic benefits that they achieved through those customized jobs, making their workplace more productive. Slide 15. So I wanted to kind of recap those findings because we want you to now think about your experiences with employers, with the work that you've done to date. And would like you to answer this question, this poll question. Based on these findings, have your employment services had an economic impact on one or more employers? So please, we'd like to get as much participation by as many folks as able and willing to answer that question.
And Dale, you can see the results.
Okay, I sure can. Yeah, so obviously the vast majority of you all said yes to this, which is very encouraging. That's excellent. Okay, cool. So with that, Maynard, let's go to the second poll question.
And we are now on slide 16.
So if you answered yes, we'd like you to select one of these choices. How many employers could you conduct an economic impact survey? Now, so I want to explain that. So you may have had, you may have employers that have benefited from it. So now the question is, if they have, could you conduct a survey with them? And I think the only other criteria you need to think about is maybe you've benefited that company, but the person you work with is no longer there. And then the question becomes, could you survey somebody else at that employer site? If the answer is yes, then that we would include that in your number. But we're interested here in how many employers would you say have experienced a benefit of your services and would be candidates for a survey. We want to get a sense of the number. So go ahead and log in your answers. Okay, well, this is good. I'm looking at the percentages, and it looks to be about 25% of you have said 1. Another 25% of you had said 4 to 7. And about almost 40% of you said 2 to 3. And then we've got this outlier group, which is a good thing, in that about 16% of you said 10 plus. So that's really interesting. So what we want you to do now is if you've said yes, and if you've got a number, particularly if you have a number, so about 60-some% of you are in the 1 to 3 range. And then about 35% of you, or 20, are in the 4 to 7, and then again those 15% of you that are in the 10 plus range. So lots of opportunities here to kind of get some information from employers in terms of this kind of help define, are there employers that would be good candidates for such a survey? And now we know, and that's really exciting. Now the question is kind of what might they say? What might we learn from those employers? So I want you to keep that in mind and think about specific employers that, that this might be something that would be you and your program, and I would even argue the employers might find beneficial. So this is some really good information. So thank you for participating, and I ask to go to the next slide. And by the way, when we go through the rest of this information, just like last time, we'd love you to post questions, and we want to save some time at the end to be able to answer some of those questions. And if it's anything like the last two webinars, we weren't able to get to all of the questions. So what I'd like you also to think about is posting those questions with the idea that I do respond to all of these questions. So the answers to the questions for the last webinar 2, are now posted, and so the questions and answers for both of these are posted on our site here. And when we get your questions, if we can't answer them all today, we will do the same thing with the questions. So it's always important to go ahead and write those questions in, and sometimes now is the best time to do that, kind of while we're going through this material, rather than waiting at the end, if you have something you want me to kind of respond to. But okay, so on to the material. So this, and some of you that were on webinar 2 would have seen this before. This came out of the report that was associated with the study. And this is, again, all information from our employers. And what they said is they gave us advice on approaching employers and building rapport. And the reason I have this up here again is it's really relevant to what we're doing today. Employers talked about the importance of building and cultivating these relationships and that sense of trust. And if you look on the next one, it talks about trust can lead to collaborative relationships with those providing the right candidates to meet their labor needs. And on another slide, you'll see that they also define trust as, once you give us a good job match, now we believe in you. Now we've said, okay, we've given this a try, we took a risk, and it's paid off. This person is well matched to the job. We're happy that this person's part of our workforce. And then that really kind of cements you into that particular organization. And then so the question becomes, are we cultivating that relationship after we've worked so hard to come up with that job match? It mentions a top-down strategy and a bottom-up. The use of a survey of your employers really kind of helps to particularly get the feedback from that top-down strategy. Slide 18, please. And these are some of their quotes. When you hire someone with a good match, we are able to build relationships to the point where we can trust them to know that they referred somebody to me was the right person. Because there are providers out there, and that's why that person said this. They're just sending me 10 applicants and asking me if I want to hire one. Sometimes that's the approach we take. We provide employment services by sending people to fill out job applications. And of course, that is not part of a real good working relationship with value-added services to an employer. Importance to share success stories was also mentioned by employers as a good idea. Well, that's what surveying your employers will accomplish, is that you can secure some of those success stories. But most importantly, success stories from the perspective of the employer. Why and how do they define success? And then at the end there, when it works out, we've got to be able to have an internal champion. And I think that's the other thing that happens, is if you go back, circle back around and conduct this type of a survey, you more likely than not would be doing it with somebody that could end up being that internal champion. And one of the things I think helps make them an internal champion is really helping them think through, okay, what were the services that you got from us? How has your company benefited from these services and the placement of a person with a disability? And get them to really think that through. And when they do, we believe they will then, in fact, be more effective internal champions for the types of placements that you're interested in accomplishing. Okay, slide 19. So in the conclusion section of this report, it talks about specialists use this information. So you can use the information from our study, but what I think would be even more impactful is if you in fact had some of this information that's really specific to the employers that you and your program has worked with directly, and build that business case using the survey. Okay, next slide, please. So the recommendation sections of the paper talked about effective communicators of the services that we offer and the benefits of those services. And again, the paper calls for use what's in this study. But again, you could then even be more specific if you were able to have similar information from the employers that you've worked with. And you could, as it says in that second bullet, put that into your marketing materials. Or, you know, it doesn't necessarily have to be a brochure. It can be a letter of recommendation from an employer. It could just be a one-page report. And that's what that talks about on the last bullet is, you know, what have you been able to document some decreased costs, increased productivity that was quantifiable? And if it is, what we find is that it's replicable. So in other words, if you're able to provide that benefit to one employer, especially similar types of operations, then what the employers are telling us is then that would be the case for other employers that have similar kinds of opportunities. And you can use this information to do that outreach to other employers who could benefit from your services. Slide 21. So also in the recommendations, it talked about maintaining that ongoing relationship through a range of recruitment and retention services. We talked a little bit about that in the second webinar. The fact that employers find that when we bring potential job candidates by to an employer site, maybe for a work site tour, maybe for a job shadow, maybe for even a time-limited type of work experience, they see it as a service to them. You know, you in fact may see it more as, well, I'm helping this job seeker learn more about the world of work through discovery and assessment. But in fact, employers find this beneficial as well. Why? You're exposing more people to their business, and you're exposing more potential job seekers that could in fact end up being job candidates. So again, that's a recruitment strategy that they find beneficial. And that monitoring and tracking. So if you do these surveys, or even just what you did earlier, thinking about how many employers have had that I can think of would have had an economic benefit from our services, just thinking about that number, and then thinking about could you survey them, really starts you on that road to tracking and having that roster of employers that you would consider to be your other set of customers. And it's very important, we feel, and the study really bore that out, that we have to keep good track of who are these employers. Why? So we can maintain the relationship. And what we find is turnover in our employment specialist positions, particularly in the job development role. When those folks turn over, a lot of times we don't maintain those relationships because other people in the organization do not have that working relationship with that employer. But if you had a roster, and if particularly the employment services manager, maintained that roster, then if somebody were to leave, you would know who those employers are, who have benefited from your services, and you could follow back up and continue that ongoing working relationship. Okay, slide 22. So we're now moving into this section, and again, if you have any questions about any of this, please go ahead and write those in so we can look them over. But what we found is that we want you now just to think about how would you do if you were to survey your employers that have used your services. how would you do it? So first of all, how many? And we've sort of already kind of asked you that question. But think about that, maybe even talk to your colleagues and come up with a list of employers. And in that list, make sure you have the primary, and that's that second bullet, the primary contact that you would want to do the survey with, and would have that perspective of economic impact that you've had on their organization. And then you want to kind of ask yourself the question, well, what survey questions would I plan to use? And what I'm going to do is give you a survey instrument that you can start with. And again, that survey instrument will be posted with this webinar after the webinar closes, and will also be sent to you. I think through that process. And then, so again, we'll help you with what survey questions to ask. And then, how would you conduct a survey to assess the economic impact of your services? Next slide. And so, when it comes to conducting that the survey, these are the options that we came up with. You could use SurveyMonkey, something online, send them the link. You could issue them a written survey, ask them to fill it out, return it. You could do that via email or mail, or hand it to them. You could do a phone interview. You could do a personal interview, or you could use a focus group. And so one of the reasons I asked towards the beginning of the webinar about how many employers would you feel you had that you could possibly survey is to really kind of think about what might be the best method of getting this information. If you were in that 60% where you had 1 to 3 employers that you could think of, then I would suggest the recommended one would be a personal interview. You really don't have enough to really conduct a focus group. So I would say personal interviews. There were some of you that had 4 to 7. I think it was about 20% of you, and about 15% of you had 10 plus in terms of employers. Those two groups, if you answered it in one of those two categories, then I would say, you're a good candidate for conducting a focus group. If you're in that 10 plus, you might be in a good situation to conduct more than one focus group. So let me just talk. So the two that we recommend are either a personal interview or a focus group. Why? It's the most engaging with the employer. And again, the whole purpose, or one of the main purposes, is to maintain that relationship, develop that rapport. And by doing and asking these questions and thinking through the answers to the questions with the person, we think is the best way to do that. So personal interviews, if you just have a few employers that you could interview, and then either personal interviews or focus groups if you have 4 to 6. I want to just talk a few minutes about conducting focus groups. That's the method that we used when we went to different states to do this. We recommend the size to be that 4 to 6. You can possibly do 3. If it's 2, you're better off maybe even 3. 3 is kind of on the borderline, but if it's less than 3, you're really best off just doing a personal interview, because you're not going to get as much in terms of the interaction between the employers. But we think the sweet spot's in that 4 to 6. Again, you might be able to have 7 or 8, but we think that then some of the employers don't have as much opportunity to really talk. So we just think that 4 to 6 is the right range to conduct it. You can get a lot of really good interaction between the employers. What we find is that when one comes up with, this was how it was beneficial to me, another employer who might not have thought of that will say, yeah, now that you say that, it did help us with our recruitment. Or now that you say that, that did save us time and money in the hiring process because they did know what our labor needs were and were able to job match effectively to our labor needs. So that's what you're looking for in the focus group, and that's why we think that that is a really effective method of getting this information. It's best if they will let you record it because otherwise you've got to write like mad to try to keep up with a bunch of people talking. And even though you want each person talking one at a time, you know, it goes, the pace of that goes pretty fast. So again, recording, it's a good idea if they give you permission. Focus groups. The other reason that you want to do it that way is that they start to see each other as here are more than one employer in this community who's benefited from your programs, and they get to see and know each other a little bit. And so a little bit later, I'm going to talk a little bit about employer-provider collaboration or coalition type of efforts. And these focus groups could then lend themselves to the development of something like that because these employers would kind of be talking to each other as well as talking to you. So that's kind of the how to conduct the survey, and hopefully that gives you some really good ideas of how you can do it. Of course, you know, doing something like SurveyMonkey or a written survey, that is less of your time. But you're just not going to get as much good information, and you're not able to kind of help them think through some of these concepts, which they may not have done before. And then the last thing you need to think about is just when would you conduct the survey? So, you know, you've got a situation right now where maybe there are some employers that you worked with in the past. Maybe it's been some time ago. So you've got kind of this starting point, and that was the number that we were looking for from you in that poll question. But moving forward, if you guys like this idea and you find it to be effective, my recommendation is that after your placements, you build in a process to follow back up and conduct this type of a survey with those employers. So then you want to ask yourself the question, should I do it after 6 months of a placement? Should I do it after a year? We think 6 is on the early side, but still viable because, you know, we think within 6 months they're going to have known whether what you've done has helped their business, or a year, which is a little bit on the long side. So anywhere in that range is good. I wouldn't go over a year. I wouldn't do it earlier than 6 months. Okay, next slide, 24. So the survey questions, want to go through that a little bit. And so right here, Maynard, I'm going to ask you to put up the actual survey itself so that the folks on the webinar can see it. So while Maynard's getting that set up, well, he's got it set up. Okay, and I think you need to minimize it a little bit. Oh, there you go. Okay, so again, this is in Word. So you could put your logo on this. You could change it any way you want. You want to add some questions. You'll definitely probably take some stuff off of it. We really tried to kind of make this as kind of comprehensive as is possible. But this really does follow what we used when we conducted the focus groups for the study that we did. So the opening one is just an overview. You want them to just kind of tell their story. Okay, and again, you know, they might look at you and say, well, you know the story. You helped me do it. But again, you want it for the record and you want their perspective on it. Okay, you know, how many have they hired? Who did they work with? And they may have worked with some other providers, not just yourself. So, you know, you'd gain the benefit of that as well, because they would be talking about not only what you've done, but at least in the beginning here, they would be talking about their experiences maybe with some of the other employer providers in the community. You talk about the length of employment, types of disabilities that the folks may have. And again, they may not know that. If they don't, I think that's probably more good than bad. They don't need to. But, you know, you just want them maybe, if they do know, kind of describe kind of the types of folks that they've hired. And then the position, occupation that they filled. And then did they have a positive experience? And again, if they're going to talk about yours and others that may have worked with them, they may have some positive and negative experiences around hiring people with disabilities. And that's all very important, good information that you might want to encourage. So you wanted them to get them talking. And again, if you're doing the focus group, you would have each person do this opening overview. And then you launch into the questions. So after that, we kind of go through these questions in terms of categories. So scroll up a little bit more, Maynard. Costs the other way. Yeah, you're doing good. Costs associated with recruiting and onboarding. How do you recruit? How do you hire? When we do informational interviews on the front end, these are important questions. Now you're asking it on the back end. Okay, how did you go about doing it? And then they may, hopefully, talk about how you fit in to how they did their recruitment and what the costs are. Now, right in this section, we just want to know how they do it and what they think are the costs associated with doing recruitment. Every employer that recruits on an ongoing basis, in other words, not a really tiny company that only maybe hires 1 or 2 times a year, but people who recruit more regularly, there's costs associated with that, and you want them to think that through. What do you think it really costs in people's time, out of pocket, whatever the case may be? And then the same thing with hiring. How do you go about hiring? What's the cost of that? And it's important that we get them to think about those costs, because that's where we are helping them save some money when it comes to recruiting and hiring. Okay, scroll down a little bit more. And it gets into the third section of that, which is the the training and the onboarding, and then there's costs associated with that. We do know that from the study that employers tend to accept the range of about $3,000 to $7,000 per person. So every time they have to fill a position, they get somebody who's a resignation letter. They know that it's going to cost them $3,000 to $7,000. And why such a range? Well, sometimes it's harder to recruit and hire. Sometimes it's harder to train, depending on the types of positions that they have. And the more difficult it is, the more costs the employer has to bear. So you want them thinking about costs. And now you want to talk about workplace benefits, and specifically the benefits of hiring folks with disabilities. So first I'm thinking about costs, and now, okay, you've hired this person. How might we have benefited you in that area of productivity, onboarding, recruiting, hiring? Have we helped some people stay longer? Have we impacted the culture? Typically, the culture doesn't have an economic, monetary figure associated with it, but they can talk about it qualitatively, how they in fact benefited the teamwork, the culture within the particular company. And then we want them to just kind of go a little bit more into estimating financial value of your services, question 7. So just keep scrolling down a little bit more. And so this section really is about those benefits of hiring a person with a disability. Keep going. And then the services. So not only is it the hiring of the individual, but we really think it's important to get them to think about what you do and what your organization does. And do they find that to be beneficial, ideally even financially, economically beneficial? Does our job coaching save them time and money in onboarding somebody new? Do we provide that hiring assistance that saves them time and money? Do they find the labor needs analysis that we do? Because that's one of the things the employers really emphasized. When we come in and do an effective labor needs analysis as part of the informational interview, we're looking at their overall operation and how to make that operation more productive, more efficient. And they see that as a service that we provide to them. So that's why it's important that you're well trained in the area of customized employment, particularly labor needs analysis, being aware of, and this is something else that we got out of the study, is total quality improvement processes is what employers think of when they think of customized employment. They don't really relate to the term customized employment, but they do relate to continual quality improvement processes, reducing waste, allowing themselves to be more efficient in their operations. And then there's others that they might in fact find beneficial of your services, and if so, you want to capture it here. Flexing and customizing jobs, again, they look at workplace flexibility as a more appropriate term than customizing jobs. And then there's some additional follow-up questions around, have we helped impact sales and revenue? And employers have said, in fact, that we have, and they've been able to actually give us some monetary projections of what that is. So those are some more questions related to workplace benefits. So go on to the next section, Maynard. And that would be current and future considerations. So you want to finish your interview with talking about, okay, what have we done to date, and what about you? You know, what incentives do you feel has motivated you to hire? What, you know, what caused you to say yes? So you want to kind of get this person in their thinking and kind of how and why did they do what they did in terms of working with you, saying yes to working with you. So scroll down, there's some more questions associated with that future considerations. Do they have any interest in ideas of potential additional employees with disabilities that might fit in well based on their concepts and understanding of either customized employment or positions that might be turning over that they might feel or you might help them think about being appropriate for some of the folks on your caseload. So can we get some repeat business, if you will, from some of these employers who we're surveying? And so that's kind of what we, I think those are the last of the questions. Go ahead and scroll down a little bit more. Yes. And so again, each of the prompts has a lot to it. You obviously don't have to use all these prompts, nor do you have to use all these questions. You don't even have to use all of the sections. Maybe you have an employer that you think's worked with you a long time, but maybe you haven't placed a customized person into the job there. So you might pull out some of those questions that are related to customized employment and not use them. So again, use the survey as you see fit. You can write your answers right on this survey. And I want to do a shout out to the folks that are on this webinar from DC, because you've now kind of seen this webinar for, we're most of the way through it, and you've seen this survey, and we have a call, kind of a follow-up call to these three the three webinar series of the three webinars, and we're going to have kind of a debrief on this Friday, August 9th at 2 p.m. Eastern. And would invite all of you that are on this webinar to join us then. And we're just going to kind of talk about some of this, answer any of the questions that you may have. But we're also interested in, are any of you interested in conducting this type of survey for one or more of the employers that you've worked with? And so we want to kind of talk about that. And one of the things I mentioned is in the study, what we found is the employers that were more likely to participate in a focus group like this were the employers that also participated in what we're calling employer-provider coalitions. So we did this study again this year. We're still, we just finished writing up the results of it. It's not available to the public yet, but one of the things that we learned in the second year of the study is that these coalitions are very effective at really getting employers to kind of work together and work with providers, focus on employment, and share leads in terms of the various caseloads. So during these what makes up these coalitions is it's made up of both employers and providers, where the providers are sharing their caseloads so that and the leads that they have. And then the employers particularly liked when the provider community kind of got its act together and identified single points of contact. so that they weren't inundated by all of these different provider organizations. So when they had a coalition, one of the motivations for an employer to participate in the coalition was that they could be assigned a single point of contact. And that person would work on behalf of the coalition, not just their particular organization, and all parties benefited. The employers benefited from a bigger labor pool, and each of the providers benefited from leads that went across other employers that they may or not have even known about. So that's another interesting concept that we want to pursue. And again, regarding the DC folks, that's also something that we want to talk about and see if you have an interest in when we get together on August 9th at 2 p.m. If you don't have information related to that debrief call on August 9th, check with Rebecca Ceylon or Montrell, Tennessee, and Montrell and Rebecca can make sure that you get the call-in information to participate in that. But I suspect you do have it because you're on this webinar. Okay, so on to now what I want to do to finish up the webinar is really kind of give you an idea of the kinds of answers that we were getting to the questions that we just shared with you. So in the overview, an employer has said, you know, we hired a person 2 years ago for the front desk of their health club, and the owner was impressed. That wasn't the internal champion, but owner kind of came around and saw what was happening, approved it. So they hired a second person, and now they're opening a second location, and they're working with that organization on an ongoing basis. So that's a sort of kind of overview that you might get from an employer who's willing to be interviewed and has seen your program as benefiting them over a period of time. Costs associated with recruiting and onboarding, this is one of the answers that was provided, or a summary of their answers. There were significant costs, particularly for the part-time positions, and that it took 8 to 12 weeks to fill. And in that 8 to 12 weeks, you know, it's a mess because they're shorthanded. And the cost associated with all that is $3,000 to $7,000, as I already mentioned. Slide 25. So under workplace benefits, somebody helps you to match the jobs. The quality of the hire, I would say, is improved. I mean, I wouldn't hire a professional recruiter for filling an entry-level position, but if companies had to use a recruiter to fill those would be pretty steep fees. So they don't use a recruiter, but that means they have to do it themselves. And there's costs associated with that. So again, it's good to kind of get them thinking about that, quantifying that, because then they'll see you as helping them reduce those costs. Flexing when it comes to customized types of jobs. One was an increase in the assembly line efficiency in terms of their producing cabinets, and this was an economic impact, that efficiency and having that customized person in that position in terms of it benefited them on an ongoing basis. Some of the repetitive work that was done by the customized person was not trivial. It's important, but it also freed up other people to do other types of tasks that are equally, if not more important. And the labor needs assessment was found to be beneficial. And what's interesting in this case is they did the labor needs assessment in the HR and accounting departments, which freed up some of those staff to be more effective. And I think, boy, what better internal champion could you have than somebody who's in the HR department, because you've had an economic impact on their department. And then, okay, so next slide, 26. Under current and future considerations, here's some answers that, you know, and this is just to kind of give you an idea of what's possible in terms of what they might say if you were to conduct this survey. And it says, I would look into more additional help, more jobs, and identify and utilizing additional customized jobs. Because once they get it and see it as beneficial, they want to do that. That's now if they find something that benefits them financially, they want to do more, and that's where I think we come in. And many of them have said this. You know, it's kind of sad is several of these employers, particularly that one who said, I have other tasks for customized jobs teed up and ready to go. The employment specialists have turned over, and they don't have any contact with any of the providers who provided placements at that particular company. And I just find that very interesting. And that was a good example of we weren't keeping track. And so the provider organization, if they just knew about this particular business or the business knew about them, they could be getting more placements out of it, assuming the job match is there. Anything that can make it more efficient, they're all about that. And again, particularly the small businesses, also, they both found it beneficial, but the small ones particularly because they're less likely to have been trained in areas like total quality improvement practices. So that's where our labor needs assessment could really benefit them. So again, these are some of the things that they have said is reasons that we should continue to work with them, and actually giving you ideas of how we can work with them on an ongoing basis. Okay, next slide. So this is my pitch, my final pitch on how and why to do these. I mean, I recognize that this is just one more thing you've got to do. But if this thing that you do allows you to better document the impact of your services, both to funding sources, but to your employer customers, and that internal champion, because if you can give those internal champions data in a report that says this is how our services has helped your business, that is putting that internal champion on a pedestal within that company, saying, look what you have done for the company by using our services. So what we find is you share that report with that internal champion that you might have done the interview with. They'll share that with their boss. They'll share that within the company. And that's another way to kind of solidify that working relationship. And that top-down, bottom-up kind of strategy is the sharing of your report based on how your organization has benefited. So those are all really good reasons to do this. And we do find that if you follow back up, conduct these surveys, as you saw by some of those employer quotes, you can get more business. You have more opportunities, and not just placements, for other kinds of recruiting, assessing, maybe even additional labor needs analysis, maybe some other departments within that same company. And then, of course, it develops and maintains the relationship. Okay, so we're getting towards the top of the hour here. Not too many minutes, but I think we do have some minutes left. Go to the next slide for questions. And yeah, and then this is just more reasons why, and I already spent some, you can do presentations on this, you could use it in your marketing material, and then that last bullet, this could be the genesis for an employer-provider coalition that would kind of have you working together with employers in a different way. Okay, so could you maybe Daryl or Maynard kind of help with how any questions that we could get answered before we wrap this up? I'm not able to see it very well.
Right. And for those of you on the webinar platform, you can submit your questions by entering your comments and questions in the chat or questions feature. And Daryl, you can come up with you can address the first question.
Okay. Dale, one of the first questions that I have is, I know you stated you're having a briefing or debriefing on Friday, August the 9th at 2 p.m. Is that open to all participants that were on this webinar call, or is that just the DC group?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry about that, but I should have made that clear. But yeah, it's just the DC group, and it's part of another project that I'm doing with them. But let me just say to everybody else that's not in DC, a number of you the last two times have emailed me, wanted some of the resources that I was offering around employer engagement. Be happy to offer some of those same resources to any of you. If you have any questions, so we don't have any kind of way to debrief, but I really want you to see us at Transcend and myself as a resource, an ongoing resource to you. And so please email me if I can help you in any way. Maybe you even want to just talk about a little bit more how to conduct these surveys. Be happy to do it. So even though we don't have a debrief, I'm glad that question was asked so that I can just make that offer. Be happy to be there for anybody who really wants to take this survey and use it. Obviously, you can tell we believe in it. The results of the study have kind of borne some of this out. And we know it's extra work for you. So if you're going to take that kind of initiative, we think it's going to help your program. We want to help your program. So just get in contact with me. I'd be happy to debrief that way.
Okay.
All right, Dale, the second question is it advisable to customize positions for disabilities, or rather ensure the organization has a level playing field that will allow anyone to apply for a position?
Oh boy, that one. I think there's more to that question, because so I think there's more to that question, and I don't know if we really have the time for that. But whoever asked that, that's a person that might be a good candidate for. Maybe just email me or call me, and I'd be happy to discuss that further. Personally, I feel customized jobs can apply to anybody. So I don't really see that it's not a level playing field. But again, there's probably more to it, and I'll be happy to discuss that further.
Okay. The next question is, I have wondered on hiring managers and recruiters hiring for disabilities, and if the net result means narrowing the playing field in a negative way.
Okay. Daryl, do you kind of help me with that question?
You know,
I think it's back to that level playing field, and I think the person who's asking those questions is feeling like customized employment, and I think that the problem is too that now with VR agencies, they're designating customized employment only for certain people because they're authorizing higher service rates, and so it kind of looks like some people have access to customized employment and some don't. So when I'm talking about customized employment, I'm talking about it from the employer's perspective. And I think that the fact that you can do a labor needs analysis with any employer, and that you can place anybody into a customized job, regardless of whether it's quote unquote authorized by VR. So I think there's a little bit, again, that's a pretty complicated question, and might be best to be handled kind of outside the webinar, especially since we're pretty much at the top of the hour. Maybe I'll take one more question, and then I think we got to wrap this up.
So the last question, Dale, is, are there tax credits or incentives for hiring people with disabilities?
Yeah, there is, particularly the WOTC. Sometimes that's not available. It has to be reauthorized by Congress, but there is that tax credit. What I will say about tax credits, we do have it in the survey because it is a potential benefit or a perceived benefit by employers, but almost to a person, every employer that we've interviewed, that is not a strong motivator. It's a benefit, but it isn't the reason that they do it. And so definitely would not lead with tax credits. At best, tax credits is something that they also get, but it's really the quality of your services and the quality of the job matches that is what motivates the employers to work with you and work with you on an ongoing basis. Okay, so we're at the top of the hour. Thank you for those questions. Any others that did come in, they will be sent to me, and I will be responding to every one of those, and then we will post that back up on the site where the archived webinar is. so that all of you can access that. And I want to thank all of you for participating in this webinar and the webinar series. It's been a real joy to do, and the response that we've gotten is wonderful. And again, please consider myself and Transcend as an ongoing resource. And as you can see, there's some other wonderful resources online, and encourage you to go to all of these. The wealth of resources that you can access and download is amazing. So again, more resources, what's up there on the screen. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Daryl and Maynard.
Okay, the resources listed on the page: Employment First Lead Center. You can access this by going to employmentfirst.leadcenter.org. The second resource is the Office of Disability Employment Practices, the initiative. This is posted at the Department of Labor's website, dol.gov. You can do a search for Employment First. And then the last resource is ODEP Drive website, which is drivedisabilityemployment.org. And moving on to slide 30. And Dale's information, Dale's email address is dverstegen@transcend.org. That is DVERSTEGEN that's TRANSCEN.org.
About Transcend Incorporated, Transcend Inc. is a national organization offering web-based and in-person training for state agencies, school districts, provider organizations, and others interested in meaningful work and community inclusion for individuals with disabilities. Transcend.org, 301-424-2002 is our number, or you can write to inquiries@transcend.org. We stand for meaningful work plus community inclusion. And just to remind everyone, please remember to fill out the evaluations so that we can know how we can improve our webinars in the future as we look forward to working with you again. Thank you so very much, and we look forward to hearing from you in the future.